You know the old saying, all MCU films are great, but some MCU films are more great than others, or something like that. We're saying that even though there are a few questionable entries in the massive Marvel franchise, we still appreciate the fact that we get to see our favorite comic characters come to life on the big screen. And let's be honest, no movie is perfect, so it's not surprising that even the greatest MCU movies have some bad moments. Today's video is all about those less than stellar moments in our favorite MCU films, so let's get into it right now. Bruce Banner has had an incredibly interesting story arc in his time in the MCU. His whole journey has been about finding a way to coexist with the other guy. Avengers Infinity War saw the two personalities at war with each other, with Hulk refusing to come out to fight after the opening scene with Thanos. And it was assumed we would see the two reconcile in Endgame. But due to the massive time jump and plot necessity, any actual character resolution between the two was glossed over, with Banner suddenly appearing as Professor Hulk and saying they worked everything out and now it's Banner's personality in Hulk's body. We have a lot of questions, including where the actual Hulk is, but the whole scene is a little weird and undercuts a moment of true character resolution with a sudden sight gag of seeing Hulk wearing a sweater while dabbing with kids. Yeah, definitely could have gone without the dabbing. It was a question that fans have been asking forever. How did Fury lose his eye? In Cap's second solo film, Fury explained how the last time he trusted someone, he lost his eye. Then when Captain Marvel was announced to be a prequel film starring a young, two-eyed Nick Fury, and the movie was revealed to be focusing on the shape-shifting Skrull, we were all pretty sure we knew what was coming. Unfortunately, it was not an answer a lot of fans were happy with. Instead of losing his eye in battle or by being betrayed by someone close to him, the Captain Marvel movie reveals that Fury lost his eye because he was cuddling an alien creature that looked very similar to a house cat. It's a fun moment, but it's disappointing that Marvel felt like they had to subvert expectations and have Fury lose his eye in a silly way, rather than something more befitting for the mysterious super spy. Avengers Age of Ultron finally delivers on the relationship we all wanted to see. Black Widow and the Incredible Hulk. Wait, no one really wanted it? Oh, our bad. But seriously, the decision to include that romantic subplot between these two characters was an odd decision that didn't feel very in line with either character. It felt like something Joss Whedon tacked on in order to give the Hulk's big exile into space at the end of the movie more emotional weight. The driving factor for the relationship was that Black Widow saw herself as a monster, and therefore was very similar to Bruce. It's not something that went over very well with fans, and we have to agree. These characters are great by themselves, but together, not so much. You can tell how much the Russo brothers were fond of this subplot too, as Avengers Infinity War barely acknowledged it, besides one quick line of dialogue when the characters were reunited. When Captain America the First Avenger hit theaters, we were still a long ways away from some of the amazing CGI that would come in later installments. Remember how our jaws dropped when we saw de-aged Samuel L. Jackson in Captain Marvel? Yeah, that's a much different reaction than the one we have when we go back to watch the first Captain America movie. Look at that little shrimp of a man who would soon grow into a fully grown Chris Evans. Although it was a lot of fun seeing Steve Rogers go from zero to hero, seeing Chris Evans' big head on a pre-super soldier Steve Rogers still haunts a lot of our nightmares. And it's even more surprising because the rest of the movie looks really great, which makes us think they just didn't know how to crack that particular element of head swapping just yet. If you ask anybody whose fault it was that Thanos succeeded in Avengers Infinity War, a majority of people will most likely point a finger at Peter Quill. When Iron Man's team and the Guardians of the Galaxy take on Thanos for the first time, they're able to nimbly keep Thanos off balance enough where it looks like they have a legitimate shot at removing the Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos' wrist. Moments away from victory, Quill loses his cool over the Gamora revelation and punches Thanos in the face, messing everything up and allowing the Mad Titan to regain his senses. It was a boneheaded move that ultimately cost half the universe their lives. Sure, you could argue that Quill getting emotional is the point of the film as it emphasizes the value of an individual life, but we still wish the moment was handled a little bit better. But without it, we wouldn't have had Endgame, so there's that at least. Fat Thor was one of the most surprisingly effective things about Avengers Endgame. Not only was it hilarious to see the former hunk turned into something comparable to melted ice cream, but it also provided some great emotional character moments showing how much Thor thought of himself as unworthy after failing to go for the head. But as funny as it was to watch a Thor that had completely let himself go, There was one part of his introduction that we couldn't help but roll our eyes at, and that's the inclusion of Fortnite. Thor and his pals could have been playing any game, but for it to be Fortnite just felt like pandering to a younger generation. What's next? Was Thor about to start flossing? Was Hulk going to dab? Oh wait, we already talked about that. He did! Whatever happened to the good old days of Mario Kart and the N64? Do they still make that? For a long time, Hawkeye was the butt of everyone's jokes. He was the Avenger easiest to make fun of, and many questioned his relevance and abilities compared to his superpowered friends. And really, this all started because his first major appearance in the franchise saw him as a mind-controlled lackey for over half the movie. What should have been the foundation for the We Love Hawkeye fan club saw the Archer acting as a lowly henchman to Loki. Sure, he snapped out of it by the end, but the damage was already done. It's definitely why Avengers Age of Ultron focused so heavily on making Hawkeye the heart and soul of the team as a pseudo-apology for how the character was treated in the first movie. No one was more disappointed than Jeremy Renner, who even asked to be written out of the franchise rather than continuing to play Hawkeye. Man, how things have changed over the years. Hopefully, wherever Ronan ended up after he got dissolved by the Power Stone at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy didn't ask too many questions about how he got there. If they did, then he would have to explain that the big bad Ronan the Accuser was beaten in a dance-off by a loudmouthed idiot. The first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was an almost perfect blend of slick MCU action and zany, quirky comedy. It turned a snarky raccoon and a gentle tree creature into household names, and successfully helped set up the cosmic side of the franchise. But it's just that final way the Guardians beat Ronan that rings a little false to us. Ronan was right there. All he had to do was tap the stone to the ground and everything would have been destroyed. But you're telling us that he got distracted by Chris Pratt dancing? It was hilarious, but come on. When Captain America says a final goodbye to Sharon Carter in Captain America Civil War, they finally act out their budding tension and passionately lock lips. On one level, it makes sense. Steve and Sharon are both capable soldiers and had begun to grow closer ever since Winter Soldier. And there's even a comic book precedent for a romance between the two characters. But really, were any of us really hoping these two got together? Isn't it a little weird that Steve was making the moves on the niece of his true love? And of course, back then, we didn't know what we know now, meaning how Cap would go back in time at the end of Endgame to return the stones and be with Peggy. But the debate that's been raging between fans is whether Cap was always Sharon's uncle in the main timeline or not. If he was, well, we don't have to tell you why that's troublesome. Ant-Man is one of the most light-hearted and funny entries in the MCU. It doesn't deal with some of the world-ending stakes that the other MCU movies dealt with, and centered around one of the franchise's most goofy protagonists in Paul Rudd's Scott Lang. But we still can't forgive the blatant product placement in its Baskin-Robbins gag. Sorry, even Ant-Man doesn't get a free pass for that. After Scott proudly declares finding a job will be no problem for someone with a mechanical engineering degree, we immediately see Scott working at Baskin-Robbins, serving ice cream to some less than stellar customers. The joke about Baskin-Robbins knowing everything that comes up later just feels like the company trying to sound hip and cool. That mostly falls flat. It would have been funnier with an ice cream shop that wasn't such a well-known brand, because maybe then we could have gotten more biting jokes about the company instead of what we got. This almost was the worst moment in the MCU. Not because it almost had our sweet innocent Spider-Man drop an F-bomb, but because this massive cliffhanger was almost the last thing we would have seen with Spider-Man in the MCU. Can you imagine that? The MCU hit us with one of the biggest cliffhangers out of any MCU movie ever, and we were almost faced with the possibility of never getting a proper resolution to it? We're quite upset that these two powerhouse companies, Disney and Sony, played with our emotions like that, but thankfully everything seems to be working out now. Though you can probably bet the next MCU Spider-Man movie won't end on such a massive cliffhanger, in case this happens again. Because what this has revealed is that sometime in the future, Spider-Man will most likely exit the MCU. And if Sony's Villainverse is a huge success, that will be sooner rather than later. Throughout Captain America the Winter Soldier, a majority of the movie was focused on the titular character. Rightfully so. It would have been weird if the movie wasn't about the Winter Soldier. But there were some interesting side characters too. Mainly Brock Rumlow, whose survival at the end of the movie got a lot of fans excited. A lot of people know that Brock eventually becomes the supervillain known as Crossbones, and the Winter Soldier's ending suggested he was being set up as a major future antagonist. Plus, given that the next film is going to be an adaptation of Civil War, where in the comics Crossbones factors heavily into, we were pretty much expecting Rumlow to return. And return he did. but just not in the way we were expecting. Turns out making a movie that's essentially Avengers 2.5 means there's not a lot of time for side villains, and Crossbones was dispatched quite quickly in the film's opening act, much to our disappointment. Black Panther is one of our favorite MCU films. Everything about it, from the performances, production design, story, characters, and just general awesomeness, makes it one of the MCU's best movies. But even the best films, especially MCU ones, tend to suffer in the third act when it all boils down to a gigantic CGI fight. We were on board with all the fight scenes and action throughout most of Black Panther, but it's that final fight in the vibranium mine that we're shaking our heads at. The whole thing could have done with another CGI pass, because as it stands now, that fight looks straight out of a PS2 cutscene. Its lackluster effects, plus the whole dimly lit scene in general, takes us out of the action in a way that makes us not cheer with excitement, but rather want to turn to the person next to us and ask what the heck is going on? Guardians of the Galaxy revolved around the protection of Xandar from Ronan. After a massive battle, the Guardians ended up victorious and saved the planet from total destruction, at least for a few years. When Infinity War opens up, we learn that Thanos had easily decimated Xandar and retrieved the Power Stone for himself. It not only renders everything the Guardians did in their first movie pointless, but the fact that we don't even see it happen is kind of a bummer. The directors have explained they cut the scene of Thanos getting the Power Stone because it was redundant and didn't add much to the story, and that does make sense, but we're just a little upset that such an important planet was wiped off the map without us seeing it. Does this mean Glenn Close is gone? What about John C. Reilly and his alien family? Please tell us they're okay. Captain America Civil War was in a tricky position where it wanted to put its characters in a situation to fight one another, but also not do any lasting damage where they couldn't team up again later. This meant that in their final fight, no one could get seriously hurt. The only one to really suffer in that final fight is War Machine, who after an accident is blasted out of the sky by Vision and is left paralyzed. Not even counting the fact that War Machine is probably a character fans don't care about as much as other Avengers, but even that injury, which was supposed to really highlight the consequences of this civil war, was immediately glossed over. Rhodey started his road to recovery by the end of the film and was back in action by Infinity War. Would it not have been more interesting if Rhodey stayed paralyzed outside the suit? When you've become the country's most wanted criminals, but you also still need a super fast computer in order to help expose a national conspiracy, then there's only one place to go: the Apple Store. In Captain America the Winter Soldier, Black Widow and Cap go dark when they become wanted, but still venture out to their nearest Apple Store in the mall in order to help uncover the mystery. And we don't know what kind of Apple Store this is, but we're pretty sure we've never been to one like the one seen in this movie. How come Steve and Natasha didn't have to stand around waiting for a free computer to use while hordes of crazy-eyed people crowd around the machines, desperate to make an appointment with all the intensity you normally only see on Black Friday? At least it nailed the annoying sales guy who only comes at the most inopportune time character that you always find at your local Apple Store. No one's going to argue that Drax is a particularly smart fighter. He's proven to be very compulsive and not one to think about his next move, so him deciding to dangle from the back of a spaceship on a wire while shooting at incoming enemies makes sense for the character. But it calls into question how strong Drax really is. After this scene, the Guardians crash land on a planet, and the only problem is Drax is still dangling outside where his body is pummeled again and again by huge trees as they crash at an incredible speed. In the end, he laughs all of it off, but it's a moment that sucks all the tension out of the situation. We know Drax is going to survive it, but when the movie makes him appear invincible, it makes us never want to worry about the character again. Because if he can survive this, he can survive almost anything. Captain America the Winter Soldier is a great addition to the MCU, and we hate to pick on it because the action choreography and its fight scenes are truly top-notch. But it also makes us question how strong Captain America really is. Remember, this is the guy who blocked Thor's hammer with his shield, held a helicopter in place by holding a building, and went toe-to-toe with Thanos, one of the strongest beings in the universe. And yet in the opening scene of Winter Soldier, he has trouble beating a normal human fighter who has the power of awesome kicks. If Cap's shield can survive Mjolnir or block a Thanos punch, then we're pretty sure it should be no match for a puny human named Batroc the Leaper. Yeah, we get how it would be boring if Cap just won every fight easily, but we're just asking for some consistency when it comes to his strength levels. Is that so much? Thor Ragnarok is amazing in so many ways. It not only revitalized the less-than-stellar Thor franchise and turned it around in spectacular fashion, but it's also the straight up funniest MCU film. Everything about it's great. Well, almost everything. Because the film had a lot to juggle, some excess weight needed to be cut, and the main villain Hela needed to be introduced as a legitimate threat. Put those two things together and you get the quick dispatchment of the Warriors 3. Now, although we're mad these characters ended up biting the bullet, we ultimately understand it from a character perspective. What we're really upset with is the method in which they are shown the door. They barely get in a line of dialogue before Hela ends them, which is shocking because of how important they were in the previous Thor movies. At least Hogan got a cool fight scene before he too was vanquished. There is a big difference between wanting to subvert expectations and delivering a cheap twist. Iron Man 3 was heralded as the big battle between Tony Stark and his arch-nemesis, the Mandarin, who audiences have been waiting to show up ever since he was first teased in the original Iron Man movie. Comic book readers know how important the Mandarin is to Tony Stark's history, and when Oscar winner Ben Kingsley was cast in the role, we were pretty excited about what was coming next. But then the infamous Iron Man 3 twist happened. The man we thought we knew as the Mandarin was actually a washed-up, boozy English actor named Trevor. The Mandarin persona was all an act put on by the film's real main villain. Disappointing? Absolutely. It would be like watching a Batman Joker movie and finding out the Joker was just some average party clown. Luckily, the real Mandarin is still out there ready to reveal himself. Knowing what we know now, it's really hard for us to watch that Sharon and Steve makeout session. But what do you guys think? What was the worst moment in a good MCU movie? Be sure to let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more awesome MCU content. Thanks for watching.